Hello and welcome to another episode of Painting with Stephen and another tantalising, titillating and terrific painting session. Episode 13. Good morning, afternoon or evening depending on where you're watching this, and let's get started. So as you can see, I'm doing a little moon right now. And I think what is actually a really interesting thing to bring up right at the very beginning of this episode is the fact that this is the very first episode that I have aired on YouTube that is all acrylic. There's not a single oil layer in this painting, and I have very complicated emotional feelings about that. I really do. I have one part of me that feels almost like I'm cheating on a lover of many years, that I'm doing something immoral and wrong, because I love oil painting so much, I love the medium so much, but yet I'm finding that acrylics are just, so effective at the moment for doing certain things, especially painting one video a week. Acrylics are obviously very, very quick drying, and so you can do so many layers at once. This painting was done in a single day, like most of my paintings, or a lot of them are done over multiple days when I do oil layers and acrylics, but this one I was able to bang out in a single day. So it just shows you the effectiveness of, literally just walking away for 20 minutes, letting one layer dry, coming back, scumbling over the top, glazing over the top. It's all possible with acrylics. Now, in saying that, am I going to be walking away from oil painting as a medium? Absolutely not. But I am very happy with how my relationship with acrylic painting is developing, because I'm finding it a very, very useful tool, because of just how effective it is, allowing you to do such quick layering so effectively. Now, a lot of the time, for example, when I'm oil painting, I will utilize the wetness of the oil to sort of blend and mix on the canvas. However, with this particular painting, I didn't do that. I more used colour and a sort of combination of colour usage and, obviously shape making and, maybe a little bit of blending when the paint was sort of between dry and wet. I wouldn't say wet, but I wouldn't say completely dry either, that sort of tacky way that paints get when they're not quite dry. I did a little bit of blending in that regard, but yeah, I mean, for the most part, the sky was literally just done sort of more utilising colour variation rather than blending, if that makes any sense, because with oil painting, you could put a base layer down that's still wet, then you could add colours on top and sort of blend them out on the canvas, whereas with acrylics, as we've just discussed about their drying time, that is almost not really that possible. But I wanted to do my sky in acrylic this time purely to try out the sort of more tonal and colour variation way of doing a sky. I also really like how an umber layer really allows some dark, dramatic sort of atmosphere when you're painting skies. You can let a little bit of that umber shine through. But the colour that I'm using right now is literally just a primary blue mixed with tons of raw umber, burnt umber, Paynes Grey, and titanium white. That's it. That's literally all the colours that I'm using for the sky. So I suppose you could say it's a little bit of a stripped back palette, which is another thing that I'm really enjoying about acrylics, is that I'm tending to use a very stripped back palette with acrylics. All I'm using really is a primary blue, a primary yellow to get all of my greens. Then I'm using umbers, Paynes Grey, and titanium white, and that is pretty much it. So it's very, very stripped back palette, but obviously, utilizing like the mixing, the mixing process to get all of the variations of colour. With oil painting, on the other hand, I tend to rely a lot more on straight out of the tube colour. I mean, okay, maybe not, but for example, something like a Naples yellow for me is pretty perfect out of the tube. I don't need to do a lot of work on it for how I utilise it. Whereas, when it comes to this, there's no way that I could do this sky, for example, with any colour out of a tube. You have to do some mixing, some cool mixing, which, yeah, I think is really good fun, and it's a good challenge, especially, and if you've watched episode 12 or 11, you'll have heard me discuss numerous times how it's so important to mix greens, and it's so important to create lots of colour variation with your greens, and the best way to do that is by mixing them. Greens out of the tube just don't tend to work that well, because they're always too saturated, for one, so they look unnatural, and then secondly, you tend to overutilise the stock colour, and so you don't get that variation needed to make greens dynamic and interesting. But realistically, like I've also mentioned in previous episodes, everybody has different things they struggle with and different things that perplex them when they're learning how to paint. And if green is a troublesome colour for you, or it certainly was a troublesome colour for me back when I was learning how to paint, for you it could be blue, for you it could be rock colours or whites or anything, or how to bring out, how to really get your lights to pop or your darks to be dark, whatever it is that you struggle with. But the thing is that I do feel like mixing colours is pretty much, I know it sounds very obvious, but it's one of the most important things you can do, because it just instantly really gives you a more organic and dynamic sort of set of colours that are more akin to what you find in nature, rather than things straight out the tube, which always tend to be very saturated and never really are quite right for any scene you're doing. Certainly a lot of the scenes that I do, at least, because a lot of the scenes I do are very much sort of moody, creepy night scenes or something like that. Obviously you can't go in with primary blue in that context. That just doesn't work. A lot of the water that I'm putting in right now, I actually used a tiny little bit of green, a mixed green, in the water to create an almost sort of sea foam or turquoise, or like a sort of bluey green tint to some of the shallower parts of the water, but realistically I wanted to just keep on, you know, adding again lots of colour variation into the water so that it just looked dynamic and interesting. So yeah, another thing that I think is quite cool and quite important a lot of the time is, and something that I've been doing a lot with my acrylic layers and my acrylic painting, is utilising very small brushes to do the job, because a lot of the time when I oil paint, I go in and block in colour with big brushes, and obviously that is very, very handy, because then you can, you know, get all the colour on the canvas, and then you can spruce it up with variations on the wet layer. But with acrylic painting it's not that simple, and obviously if you're layering oil paints then it's not that simple either, because what you really want to do is you want to really sort of like put in tons and tons of colour variations from the beginning, and I think small brushes really help facilitate that. They help you focus in on adding in proper variation from the very beginning, which is very useful, because and you know, it's a bit like how the Impressionists used to paint. I think I discussed that last episode, where the Impressionists would paint, you know, with that very famous sort of small square brush that they all used. I know it's got a specific name, but I think you probably know what I mean. Like, you know, it's like a small sort of, you know, squarish brush that they sort of use to get that almost layered tile effect. You know, it's like a bunch of different coloured tiles, you know, sort of almost, you know, amalgamating into one. And obviously last episode I talked about the use of complementary colours in order to create, you know, even subconsciously, that tonal variation that actually keeps a painting intriguing, which is a very common and famous Impressionist trick. Well, I think that sort of ethos is almost what I'm talking about here. They used sort of one kind of brush throughout the whole painting to force them to add in that colour variation, and to sort of almost constantly keep every single stroke of the brush fresh, and every single colour they were applying interesting. And it's sort of a similar concept that's being explored here, because, you know, when you use a small brush, everything has to be sort of eventful. Every stroke has to mean something. And I think that's a very dynamic and interesting way to paint. One thing I will say is this is quite a small canvas, you've probably noticed. So yeah, okay, from that perspective, it's a lot easier, isn't it, to use small brushes. When you're scaling up and you're using bigger canvases, obviously it becomes a lot more challenging to use small brushes, but obviously you would use small brushes in sort of in proportion to the canvas that you're using. So, you know, if you've got a ginormous like 60 by 80 centimeter canvas, it might be extremely tedious to do a lot of your blocking work, for example, with a tiny little brush like I'm using here. Like I think it would be probably classed as some sort of liner brush or rigger brush. But realistically then, if you were, you know, painting on such a giant canvas, you would probably, you know, you could utilise maybe you know, a slightly larger square brush, you know, to sort of, you know, still get that tons of variety, tons of variation in your colour, just because you'd be essentially scaling up your process, but still keeping the same ethos in mind. You know, but just to talk about something completely different. I mean, as you can see, I'm utilising, you know, a bit of colour variation when the moonlight hits the water there. There's blues, there's, you know, lighter blues, darker blues, then there's, you know, really intense white. So yeah. It's an important thing. Don't just basically hit, oh, you know, I want to get, you know, all these blues in straight away, because when you start to do that, I do feel like your painting will suffer. If you just, you know, put the same blue everywhere, your painting's going to look sort of phoned in, derivative, that sort of thing. You know, you want to create a lot of variation in colour, I feel. But yeah, I was in Tuscany. Me and my girlfriend went to Tuscany. It was absolutely incredible. It was an extremely beautiful trip. And we saw tons of just absolutely incredible things from obviously I'm a historian, so from a history perspective, you know, visiting a place like that is absolutely incredible, but also from an artistic perspective, you know, it's so inspirational, because, you know, all of these Etruscan tombs and all of the incredible ruins and sort of the history of the region, coupled with you know, all of these remnants of lost civilizations. Yeah, it's very inspiring from an artistic perspective, and I don't know what I'm going to paint for my next painting yet, but, you know, is it going to be something maybe like a tomb or cave dwellings like that? You know, we visited a lot of Etruscan cave settlements that also had tons of necropolises and sort of, you know, catacombs within the caves, and I've always been very fascinated by cave dwelling, troglodytism. You know, I've always been really fascinated about the utilisation, especially in the Mediterranean, of caves as settlements, and, you know, whole cities being found in caves. I find that very, very fascinating. I visited, you know, in the sort of, God, I can't remember the part of Spain I visited last year where I saw them. I can't remember the name of it, but there's places in Spain where Gore is one of them, where essentially in the reconquests of the Muslims were pushed out into these cave settlements, and they built these ginormous big castles right into the solid rock. So you could, you know, for example, see that, but then also right beside it were Neolithic dolmens, which you could also see. So layers and layers of history in the same place, the same location. It's very evocative, it's very interesting, it's just an absolute, just incredible experience to see things like that, I feel, you know. And I have been thinking recently that I want to paint some sort of tomb. You know, I think if you've watched this channel, you'll probably know by now how fascinated I am with remnants of societies and sort of lost artifacts of civilizations that have crumbled and decayed, and you know, I think from an imagination perspective and a fantasy perspective, these motifs are very, very powerful symbolically. So I think tombs are really they have that power also to be very symbolic and to be very evocative, and that's why I really want to paint one of them eventually. I don't know what style yet, whether I would go for maybe something very Etruscan-y, or maybe I would go for something more sort of Greco-Roman or even Macedonian, because I've seen a lot of Macedonian tombs as well, very interesting. Alexander the Great's tomb. It's very fascinating also how all of these cultures, they have very, very similar ideas about how to preserve their dead and how to, what they put in with their dead, but a lot of the time it's done in such very different ways. In Macedonia, they would make these incredibly ornate, beautiful entrances with pillars and, grand mosaics. But then, and they would put the cremated remains of their loved one, ruler, whatever, inside the tomb, with tons of pottery and gold and interesting, fascinating things. But then they would completely seal it off. So although all of this ornate stuff, like these pillars for example, at the entrance were there, you wouldn't see that. You would just see a giant big mound, because they literally covered it all up so that it formed this big dome, which is really interesting, because then obviously you think about the way we bury our dead now. The memento mori, or the sort of headstone, the sort of reminder of the dead person is within our field of view. That's what we go and pay reverence to. We go to these locations to then read the headstone and think about that dead person. Whereas back then, obviously in this Macedonian tradition, all of that would have been completely hidden, so you wouldn't have had the ability or the opportunity to see any of that grandness or any of that, like beautiful art that was dedicated to this person, unless you were there at the sealing of the tomb, because it would have been completely filled up or filled in, or dirt would have been completely covering it, after they were sealed in it. So that's very interesting. But when I visited Greece last year, to see some of the stuff, what was really interesting is that it also, like a lot of those Macedonian tombs, they had cave robbers that were just sealed in there, because they were notoriously difficult to rob, mostly because you could get in, but once you burrowed your way in, it was pretty much nigh impossible to get out. And so often found with the remains of, for example, Alexander the Great, I'm pretty sure his tomb was robbed, or it was attempted to be robbed. Often with the remains of these great heroes and important personages, you found robbers that had gone in there and died of starvation, which, God, what a way to go, huh? Horrible. But then at the same time, I think you could probably say deserved. But here's the thing. I think, it's a motif, isn't it, within fiction of, the curse of sort of going into a tomb, raiding a tomb, and, it bringing misfortune or curse or some sort of horrible sort of almost karma upon you. And in a way, I do think that there's a very interesting side to that argument from the way that we conduct ourselves now, because and I'm gonna touch on this with other videos, I suppose, maybe moving forward on my channel, because what I find really interesting about this is, from an anthropological, historical perspective, it's very, very fascinating to, for example, look at Egyptian coffins or mummies, or look at Greco-Roman style tombs or any of this sort of stuff. But here's the thing. These societies, these cultures, they devoutly believed that these people would be going to the afterlife, and they used their customs and traditions to make sure that they went properly to the afterlife. And they built these reverential tombs for their loved ones and for their leaders and for their respected personages, thinking that that is what was going to happen. And you know, realistically, it's sort of sad in a way, because then, you know, we other cultures come along. I don't mean we as in, you know, the West or anything stupid like that, because this is a tale as old as time. You know, for example, Egypt was sacked by the Assyrians, wasn't it? And when the Assyrians took over, you know, everything was defaced, everything was sacked. Then, you know, later on, Islamic leadership caused all of the tombs to be defaced and the pyramids to be defaced, because they saw that as sacrilegious. So, you know, it's not just, you know, for example, our museums or anything like that where this happens. Like, it's happened. I'm talking about on a more abstract level. Clash of civilizations and clashes of cultures happen all the time, all throughout history, and it's just really sad in a way that a whole culture and a whole civilization's way of trying to protect their dead is then desecrated in such a profoundly horrible way, or just in a way that they wouldn't want. And you know, this definitely is going to feature in maybe an Agora episode at some point. Don't know if anyone watching this right now has watched Agora episode 1, but the reason that I've made that video series and why I'm going to continue with that video series is because I want an outlet to explore more philosophical ideas, historical problems. It's going to be analysing things from a more abstract level, but and also there is going to be a lot of art history on the Agora. The Agora is obviously meant to just be a sort of exploration of any fascinating idea, hence the name. You know, any idea that has any sort of bearing on today in an interesting way, or has any sort of intrigue in terms of its power, you know, will be talked about. And that's going to range from literature, art, history, psychology, anthropology, science, whatever. There's going to be a whole host of things that are going to be discussed. I'm very, very excited to really get stuck into a lot of those essays. I'm very, very excited to continue to write, and you also just utilise my writing as well, because the Agora is scripted. Obviously this is just me rambling into a microphone, you know, in real time in one take, whereas like the Agora is scripted, so it's all pre-rehearsed, or written out in an essay format, and then, you know, recited. So it's a different way of making videos, which is also really exciting. By the way, I just want to apologise profusely for the terrible lighting in this video, because, and not only the terrible lighting, because it was a really sunny day. I was painting in the middle of the day, and so the lighting is all over the place. It's not ideal, but yeah, realistically I don't really know what can be done about it, or what could have been done at this moment about it, but it's really not ideal from a video perspective, so I'm very sorry about that. But onwards and upwards. you know, like maybe at some point, hopefully I'll have a more professional setup, you know, where things are more organised, but as of right now, I just don't really have the space to do that, you know, so the way I'm filming is, unfortunately, sort of just the only place and setting where I really can film like this right now. So yeah, it's an unfortunate thing, you know, but yeah, the lighting is not ideal, unfortunately, but yeah, you know, it's still, I still think, you know, I've always been a big believer, you know, because I think every artist will know this. It doesn't matter whether you're a writer, a painter, a musician, even an intellectual, a thinker. It doesn't really matter. Like, you know, for example, Charles Darwin, he never wanted to release Origin of Species until his friends and loved ones basically like forced him to do it, because he was so sort of shy when it came to, like, yeah, I don't think this is perfect, like I think I'm gonna hold on to this until I have something more tangible and something more real and something better and more proof. But how far do you take that? You can just go on and on and on, and then you release nothing, and nothing will get achieved, nothing will get done. This is where I am a big believer of, I have suffered from that mistake before, of going, no, it's not good enough, I can't release this is crap, I don't want, you know. But see, realistically, a lot of the time just showing up and doing something is enough. And when it comes to art, you know, in videos like this, for example, yeah, it's not perfect. Sometimes the art won't be perfect or the way you want it. Sometimes the video won't turn out as pristine or as good as you want it. But realistically, yeah, I mean, there should be some quality, you know, and definitely some sort of aspect of, yeah, this is shit, I don't want to release this to the world. But oftentimes, I think just doing something and just sort of putting your stuff out there anyway is a really good thing, because, you know, you even may not like it that much, but someone else might see some magic in it, or someone else might be inspired by it, or someone else might, you know, learn something from it. And so why not? Realistically, what have we got to lose, you know? I mean, why not put your stuff out there? A lot of the time it's just you're holding yourself back needlessly with your sort of like mind thinking too much, and, you know, you're artificially sabotaging yourself, really. And yeah, that's no good, you know, especially if you've got a creative personality. You sort of want to just try things and see if they work, and get your stuff out there, you know, because the more you procrastinate and the more you don't show your stuff, the further behind you're going to be, in a way, when you finally do decide to get your stuff out there. I mean, because I've been making music and painting and stuff, you know, like, I mean, I've been making music since I was, you know, in my teens, but, you know, have now only decided, you know, very recently to actually try and, you know, get stuff out there. So it just shows you, you know, you can hold yourself back when, you know, really you should be getting your stuff out there. Yeah, but here's the finished result. For such a small canvas, I'm pretty happy with it. One thing I will say is I feel like the Abbey in the background, or the Priory, can't decide what I'm going to call it, looks a lot better in real life. But then, do you know something? yeah, I think it's pretty cool, and the fact that it's one of my first acrylic only paintings, I think is really cool. It's just moving everything in an interesting direction. So yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me for another rant and ramble. And I shall see you for episode 14, hopefully. And goodbye.